So introduction. So why warehousing in cloud? Why Synapse is a game changer? Traditional versus modern data warehouse. We have like, modern architectures and Synapse data warehouse architectures. And then again, like, we have another thing called Azure Synapse Studio. I'm going to show you this as well. It's like unified experience. That's what they call it. Unified experience. We will see what it is. So I think before getting into Synapse, a quick, very high level, brief explanation about data warehouse, right? So we have two systems. Again, these are like very legacy systems, transaction systems like OLTP, yeah, online transaction processing, and OLAP, online analytical processing. So transaction systems, they used to be like source systems, right? So for example, if you have like a web application and a user is making some changes and he's doing some transactions in the front end in the web, and all that data gets updated in the backend. That's like, the front web page, right? Your UI is directly integrated with the database. That's called transaction database. So whatever the user who he's doing, he's surfing in the web page, and he's making all the changes like adding his name, his details, credit card details, and then adding them to cart and just submitting a request or an order. And all this information in real time, it gets transaction. All these things, you call them transactions, right? I mean, like bank transactions, you do them in real time. Similarly, if you want to compare with that, all these activities, you do them in real time. And this data gets stored in the database. Okay. So let's say you also wanted to list some products. Let's say you are searching something. You are searching in search engine, let's say some Amazon website, you wanted to buy some things for your house, or maybe you wanted to do some electronic gadget shopping. Then you start searching like, I want iPhone 11. So once you search that, that request, that API request get hits to the database, and then you get the data. So that database, it's called transaction database. So the direct coupled database to the front end application is called OLTP systems. Okay. So that database can be a SQL database. It can be NoSQL database, right? So you also have like, transaction NoSQL databases. We've discussed that in Cosmos DB session, right? So what is OLAP system, right? So you have all this data. It's like transaction. It should be very performant, because user don't want to waste his time sitting in front of that web page, querying for all those details, because he wants to do some shopping, and we wanted to give him like, very amazing and extraordinary user experience. So for that, the transaction system should be as fast as they can. Okay, so now you have all this data getting stored in a transaction. So you can't store like historical data in the transaction. No, maybe after 2 days you want to delete the data, because you want to keep your transaction system as high it can perform. What I mean here is, let's say if you have historical data, then if user is doing something, then that query has to run through the entire historical data and it has to retrieve the data, right? Because again, you will have some latency issues. You have to manage your indexing, you have to manage your partitions and all, because that is not really meant for that, right? That their transaction database is not meant for that. So if you wanted to do some queries, if you wanted to do some analysis, if you wanted to do some predictions, if you wanted to do some visualization, you can't directly connect to your transaction system, because there, let's say the user is using your application connecting to transaction, and your developer or your data scientist, right? One of your data science guy, he's also connecting to the same transaction system and querying the data. So both of them are doing it at the same time. So you are increasing the load on the transaction system, right? Then the performance of the system goes down, because if you have like n number of queries hitting to the system, then the performance, it's like inversely proportional, right? So for that reason, they have started with another system called OLAP. It's analytical system. It's a online analytical processing system. So what they do is, every night, maybe if it is like a batch system again, so every night, whatever the data they have on their transaction system, they will use an ETL application, and then they load this data from their transaction system to a OLAP system. Okay, so that OLAP system is called a data warehousing system. So in a very high level, so that data warehousing system is used to do some analysis. Data analysts will be working on that. BI developers will be working with that. Data scientists, data engineers. So usually they'll connect their tools. It can be a BI tool, it can be an ETL tool. So they'll connect all these tools to that system, and then they'll fetch the data. So if they wanted to do some pattern, right? If they wanted to find some pattern, if they wanted to do some historical analysis. So for that, you need a different system, so that you're not disturbing the actual transaction system here. So just try to visualize what I'm trying to say here. You have your front end, you have your transaction database, then you have your data warehouse system, which is called OLAP system. Okay, so here we are talking about that OLAP system. So back in days, people used to implement this data warehousing system. So you can implement data warehousing in any database. It can be either SQL Server, it can be either Oracle, it can be MySQL, it can be MariaDB, right? It can be PostgreSQL, it can be any database. It's actually the methodology. So data warehousing is nothing but a methodology where you need to follow some strategies, follow some rules and regulations so that you have your data in standard structured format for you to do some analysis. Right? It's not like, I create n number of tables. I want to dump the data and then someone wants to query. It doesn't work like that. So there are some strategies, there are some methodologies you need to follow when you wanted to set up a data warehousing system. I think there were like so many openings back in days, at least here in Netherlands, for data warehousing positions, because few companies, they wanted to set up their proper data warehousing system. You know what I mean? It's not a data, it's actually a database, but following that methodology. Again, that comes with experience, and there are some things which you need to learn before getting into that area. Okay, so here what Azure is trying to do here is, so back in days, like I said, all these on-premise databases, right? So people were implementing this data warehousing. So Azure thought that, so why not we implement a complete data warehousing system in cloud? It's not a SQL database, it's actually a data warehouse system. So like I said, the difference between database and warehousing is the methodology, is the strategy. So Azure is giving us, or it's provisioning us, and it's making that flexible for us to use the data warehouse directly in the cloud without even following those methodologies. Of course, there are few, but there are only few. You don't really have to set up everything from the scratch because the service is already there. You need to provision the service and then use them as a data warehousing system. So we're going to see that. So that is nothing but the data warehouse, right? So I think the name itself, it's like a warehouse for your data. So warehouse, you have warehouses for all your inventory systems, right? You keep all your stock in the warehouses. So here we are keeping our data, so it's called data warehouse. So it is in the cloud, so then we call it like data warehouse in the cloud. Why? I think we've discussed, because OLAP systems are needed, right? We need OLAP systems. And then what is Azure Synapse service? Why it is a game changer? We'll see that. And traditional and modern data warehouse system. Like I said, in traditional, you had to implement that by yourself, like manually, with taking a database and then structuring it. But in modern data warehouse, it's like everything is already there, right? You don't really have to worry about all the backend things, what's happening. So you already have a data warehouse, you just run the service and use it. We're going to see the architecture and all this unified experiences when it comes to Synapse, right? But this is a basic introduction for you to get started with Azure Synapse Analytics. So what is Azure Synapse Analytics? Azure Synapse Analytics is nothing but an Azure data warehouse. It used to be a Azure data warehouse. Okay, let me put it in this way. It used to be a Azure data warehouse, but not anymore. So now it is a unified, I mean, they wanted to provide us a unified experience, but now Azure Synapse Analytics, I mean, they've added this term, like, before it was Azure Synapse data warehouse, now it's Azure Synapse Analytics. But why they had to change the name, we'll see that. Okay, so why warehousing in the cloud? Again, I think these things are common. I mean, marketing strategy, whatever it may be, but these things are common. For me, the important additional aspect which gets added to this is MPP. Okay, so let's go with this list. No capital expense, no hardware, no, you can scale, cost is less because you don't have to do all the infrastructure. It can integrate with all the services, blah, blah, blah. Time to market is less because if you wanted to set up a data warehouse in on-premise, the project might go for 3 months, it might go to 6 months, just to set up from scratch, just to set up a brand new data warehouse in on-premise system. Time to market. So time to market is nothing but, when you start and when you implement and it goes to production, right? So that's nothing but time to market. And it used to take like months, but now, I mean, you can set up and you can run the service within minutes. Again, to follow, to inject the data, it might take some time, but time to market is very less when it comes to cloud. Okay. And what is MPP? So MPP is nothing but massive parallel processing. We'll see what it is. So I think if you look closely, focusing on what I'm saying, especially when it comes to Databricks, when it comes to HD Insight, we've discussed that, you have a parent node, which acts like a manager, and then you have like worker nodes where the actual work will be performed, right? Where the actual work will be processed. Similarly, I mean, that was again for the file systems, right? So because Databricks, it works on Databricks file system, and for HD Insight, it works on Hadoop file system. So the structure and the underlying architecture and the framework was completely based on the file system. But when it comes to database, right? Like Laksh mentioned, at the end of the day, even in the databases, you have these files, right? And then you have a framework on top of them, where when you write some query, it fetch the data from that file. But even here you have files, but here the design is completely different. Again, this is their patented information, and they don't really disclose us that actually how it is, right? But here you have the similar concept when it comes to parent node and worker nodes. So here you have the nodes, and you can do the distribution and you can do the processing parallelly. So that's the reason we call it as MPP, massive parallel processing system, right? Based on the load, you can scale it. So that's what you're saying. That's like horizontal scaling. You can add another node. But here we are talking about database. It's not like Databricks, or it's not like HD Insight. I hope you're getting the distinguish. You're able to distinguish here. You're able to differentiate or understand the difference. You're talking about database. You're talking about data warehousing. But still, you can scale it. You can add another node, and the data will be distributed, and the processing is also distributed. This is really amazing. Yeah. So old data warehouse system was something like this. All the different kinds of files which you used to get from the source systems. Then you had these ETLs like Informatica, Pentaho, Talent, SSIS, all these kind of ETLs, or maybe some kind of custom ETL, which you write from your PLSQL logic or SQL logic, right? And then you load the data to your data warehouse system, right? Again, data warehouse is nothing but a database with certain methodologies, okay? So then you load the data to data warehouse, and then you perform some analytics on top of that. You have your own SMEs, like, subject matter experts, or like, a data analyst who will go to this data and do some data mining, data wrangling, all these kind of activities they perform on top of this, and then you perform these analytics on top of it, and then you send the data to any BI tool, because all the structured, formatted, clean data you send, right? So for me, this is like bronze data, silver data, gold data, for instance, like, because this is like very valuable, right? Very valuable information in the report. Based on this information, people will take certain decisions, right? The management will take certain decisions. And to understand this visualized report, you don't really have to be like, expert in the data side, because we wanted to make it very easy for them to understand. That's the reason we put all those, visual modules and visual components here, especially when it comes to Power BI. But we wanted to make it easy for them to understand, because we don't want to put them in like rows and columns. We wanted to put it in like pie chart or bar graphs, and also that people can really understand. Okay, there is a question from Chris saying that he wants me to elaborate on analytics part in this chart. Okay, so this, you see, analytics, this is not Azure Synapse analytics. So here, when I say you perform analytics, right? So when I say you perform analytics here, so what I really mean by that is you have all your data here on the data warehouse, right? So you wanted to get a valuable information out of the data. So for me, analytics is nothing but, let's say in yesterday's session, right? I think when we were doing some demos for stream analytics, what we have done. So there was some JSON file with n number of columns, with 10 columns. So what I've done is I only selected, like, select first name, last name, and gender from so and so table. So for me, that is an analytics. Simple analytics, but that is an analytics. Okay. So for instance, here, when it comes to analytics, right, you do some joining between dimensions and facts. And based on that join, you get some, let's say all the dimensions will have contextual information, and all the fact table will have the actual measure. Maybe the sales information, or maybe the number of transactions you did from your organization or your company did, right? All that kind of information. So then you try to do some join there. You try to do some joining, do some union operation. For me, that is an analytic operation, right? For me, that is like, you're trying to join it and try to get some insight out of it. So that can be an analytic. Okay, I think maybe if we move forward, right? So we might get some more, understanding about this analytics. So for now, let's park it. If you don't understand, I mean, just try to understand this is like an old data warehouse system, right? Yeah, exactly. We park it and then we move forward. And when we see that how we going to leverage or how we going to replace this with our modern architecture. But here, what I wanted to highlight is this is nothing new we are doing here, right? This is already there from decades. I mean, this setup is already there. This is not something like, Microsoft has invented or something. No, this is already there. If you see, nowhere we see any Microsoft tool name or something, because this is like a standard pipeline. You can call it end-to-end pipeline from source till destination, from source till report, right? So this is nothing new. So again, this analytics, it depends on the use case and the requirement of the customer, like what they wanted to get out of this historical data. Okay, let's move forward and see what we have. Okay, so what is modern data warehousing? So here in the modern data warehousing, just forget about this data factory, forget about these components, just focus on these high level information here. Just try to focus on that and store. Okay. Again, in the modern data warehousing, if you try to compare the system with this system, right, you have all the different kinds of information, real-time streaming information and batch information coming from different systems. Okay, so let's say we have all the informations and we have all the connectors. So first thing what we need to do is you need to connect to all the systems. So here, back in days, the challenge we had was, for example, Informatica was there as an ETL tool, but it wasn't really supporting to all the source system because all the connectors were not developed, right? Because let's say there is a custom database system, and to connect to that system, that particular vendor has to agree with Informatica to build a connector, to build a driver to connect to that system, right? But thanks to cloud and thanks to all those partnerships between companies, now we don't really have to worry about that, and we also have APIs to retrieve the data, even though if you don't have like a native connector. When I say native connector, let's say if you wanted to, let's say if you want to use your SSMS, right, SQL Server Management Studio, and if you want to use that, it is a tool, right? It is a query tool built by Microsoft. If you want to connect to any database, right? So by default, you have that JDBC connection in between, right? And then you provide all the details like, connection details, username, password, all this authentication, authorization mechanism, and then you connect. But there, the driver, what I was talking is JDBC driver, right? The database connector, it is already implemented. So using that, you can connect to the database. It is already there. But there were few systems where we did not have that kind of connector. So we couldn't connect natively to those systems. And if you cannot connect to the system, you cannot retrieve the data, right? Because you need to have a robust, stable connection. But again, nowadays, even if you don't have a native connection for few of the systems, you can leverage APIs, and all the all the applications nowadays, they expose these APIs. So again, let's not go deep into what is API, how you can do that, blah blah blah. So API is nothing but like, you have an URL endpoint, and using that you can fetch the data, and you can pass the parameters, you can pass the strings in the URL itself. Let's say you wanted to fetch the data where the customer ID is equal to blah blah blah. You can pass it in the URL itself, and you get all the details for that specific customer. Okay, for example. So first thing what we need to do here is, let's say if you wanted to apply, or if you wanted to model, or if you wanted to get some insights or do some analytics on top of that, right? You need to get the data in one place, because you have systems, you have different source systems, but you wanted to prepare and train, and you wanted to store all that information and create your model, so that you need all that data in one place, in a specific structure, so that you can directly connect to that and do all your analysis on top of that, right? So to do that, the first thing what we need to do is ingest, right? It is like an integration tool. So ingest is nothing but an integration tool. So you need to ingest. Okay, so ingest is nothing but it will connect to all the systems and it will ingest the data. So for us, we've already seen that ADF can be an amazing thing which can act like an integration tool here, right? So using ADF, you can connect to n number of systems. If there is no native connector, you can use an API. And using ADF, what you have to do is you have to copy the data, right? In ADF, I think we have this copy module, right? So for example, I'm just giving you an example so that you can relate this, because we've already seen what is ADF. So we know that. So first we need to ingest the data. Okay, we have connected all the systems. Now we are pulling the data. Okay, so what you have done is you have pulled the data and you have stored it into some SQL data warehouse. Okay, so again, like an intermediary staging data warehouse. Okay, so now you have all the data you put it into SQL data warehouse. So here you are doing some more exploration. Now you have all the information. Now you're trying to do some exploration. Okay. So then you are preparing it and training it. Okay. So for that, again, we have this Azure Databricks where you can write your own scripts and you can again, here explore, prepare, model. For me, this is like, overlapping thing. I mean, you can do all the preparation, model and everything here itself. I mean, you don't need the rest, all these two systems. No, you don't need it. But maybe for different, different teams want different data, right? So let's say another team only wants to connect to this semi-explored data. So they wanted to connect to this SQL data warehouse and they wanted to do their analysis. Because if you do all your preparation, model and everything here itself, so if another team wants some raw data, they won't get it, right? So that's the reason maybe they have scheduled it into different phases so that based on the team within your organization, they can perform the activity. Okay, so you do explore, you do prepare and train. I think for that we have Azure Databricks, and then you do modeling. Here, model is not the machine learning model we are talking. Here we are talking about the data model, right? It can be machine learning model, but this is not machine learning model. Here we are talking about data model. When I say data model, it is dimensional model. So what is dimension model? You have dimensions, facts, then you have all this relationships, primary key, foreign key. We're going to see that. But usually when we are talking about data warehouse, we talk in that language. It's like a dimensional modeling. Okay, dimensional modeling. So that is the model we are talking about. So once you create your data model, once you create your dimension model, then your BI tool can connect to that model, the data model, and then it can consume the data. Then your advanced analytics, your machine learning can connect. If you have any framework already, it can connect to the data model and then it can predict something. Or if you wanted to use stream analytics or anything, maybe, right? For instance, so then you can also do some real-time analytics on top of that. Okay. So what I'm trying to say here is, here, let's say you have an organization and you don't use any of this. So you only provide them the data in a structured model, right? So because you don't know the customer requirements, you have some other teams, every customer has different needs and they want to build their own reports. So in that case, what you do is, as an organization, what you really do here is, so you build the data model and you only expose the data model for them. So that's it. Here we are only providing the data model for you. So the data model we provide like a generic data model, and any team using any of their favorite tool or any of their framework can connect to that data model, and then they can do the additional activities on top of that. Okay. So here again, to do all these activities, you need a storage layer. So if you wanted to store the data in file system, you have storage. So this is like a modern data warehousing. I think before Azure Synapse got evolved, this was the hierarchy, or this was the model people used to follow. At least they used to implement in their organizations. Okay. So then we have, again, I think this is the same thing, but here in a different, different way it's been represented. So here we're talking about, again, the input systems, right? Input files and input systems. And then we are talking about integrating using Azure Data Factory. That's what we've seen. And then here the storage can be Azure Data Lake, right? And then you do some preparation, you do some transformations using Azure Databricks, but you can also do some transformation using Azure Data Factory, right? I mean, again, here we have an overlapping, see? But what Microsoft recommends is use Data Factory for copying, use Azure Databricks to do some transformation. Why? They're asking us to utilize and use all these tools so that they get their business, But you can leverage everything in Data Factory. You don't really need Azure Databricks. But if you have like a complex situation or complex scenario where you wanted to do some transformations, right? Being as a data scientist, if you wanted to do some, okay, I think someone is ringing the bell. In that case, you use Azure Databricks, and then Azure Data Lake is used for storage. We've seen what it is. And here to do the modeling, right, we use Azure Data Warehouse, and then we connect to a Power BI, right? So what if I say you have different components? Again, you have to integrate, right? So let's say you have Azure SQL Data Warehouse, but you have to connect to Data Lake. You have data lake, but you have to connect, right? You need to use that connector. And you have data bricks, but you need to use that connector. If you remember, we had to create those linked services, data sets, and all that thing, right? Even though all these services are within Azure, but still we need to explicitly create that, right? And again, if you wanted to use Power BI, you have to connect to that workspace and then provide all the tenant information and then connect and create the visualization. So what if I say that, this entire thing lies in one system? If I say that, all these components are available in one place so that you don't really have to worry about the integration and the security part. So that is nothing but our Azure Synapse. No, so in Azure Synapse, you have this guy. In Azure Synapse, you have this one, you have this one, you have this one. You also have Power BI. We're going to see that. So that's called Azure Synapse Studio, right? So Azure Synapse is providing an unified experience where data scientists can use data bricks, notebooks to do their job. Data engineers can use Azure Data Factory to create the data pipelines. And maybe database administrators can use, or maybe or data analysts can create their data models on Azure, and BI specialists, right? BI developers can use Power BI. So it's like an unified experience. It's giving you like a single platform where everything is available and everyone can collectively work at one place. So that's nothing but Azure Synapse. So just to give you a little bit background on this. So before Azure Synapse Analytics came to the market, so we had Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So Azure SQL Data Warehouse was there already. Okay. So this was like a standalone service where used to do all the modeling, and it used to act like a cloud data warehouse. Okay. So then they renamed Azure SQL Data Warehouse to Azure Synapse Analytics. But the functionality of Azure Synapse Analytics is the combination of all these modules. But let's say I don't want to use Azure Synapse Analytics. I only wanted to use Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So what to do then? So I think we still have this Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So if you don't want to use any of this, you only wanted to use this, we also have that. Okay, we're going to see that. We're going to see those two things. But for you to just get understanding about what is Azure Synapse is nothing but it's a combination of everything. So I think we have a definition. Yeah, Synapse is the next generation of Azure SQL Data Warehouse, right? Blending big data. So when I say big data, it's about like data lake and data bricks and data warehousing and data integration. Here they're talking about data factory into a single unified service that provides end-to-end analytics with limitless scale. So here we are talking about analytics, right? In each and every stage, you perform some level of analytics, some level of analysis. In Databricks, you perform some level of analysis. In Data Factory, you do some analysis. While preparing the model, you do some analysis. So these all things are analytics, right? And again, it depends, like simple analytics or advanced analytics, right? Usually advanced analytics are termed or called as machine learning or deep learning models. Okay, so again, the same thing, Azure Data Share ecosystem. It's like, unified single platform, which can connect to different machine learning, Power BI, it can connect to different systems. So again, on-premise cloud, and it gives you unified experience, Synapse Studio integration, management, monitoring, security. I think you know all these components, and the underlying part for Azure Synapse is one is SQL, the other one is Spark. We will see that, and again, machine learning and Power BI is directly or already integrated with that. So without wasting time, let's get into this demo part and see. Yeah, I think here what they are saying is like it's a limitless scale. You can scale it unlimitedly, powerful insights. Security is there because Azure already has a security module, and you can integrate that. Code-free data orchestration. So we are talking about data factory here, drag and drop interface, right? Choice of language. When it comes to notebooks, you can use C#, you can use Python, you can use Scala, you can use R. You can launch any of your preferred and favorite language. So, here, again, the other interesting thing, right? For me, back in days, whenever people used to post, if they have any job requirement, they used to specifically mention that we need Python language or we need Java language with so many years of experience. But nowadays, most of the posts which I see out there in LinkedIn or in different job post platforms, so they post the role, right? They post like, we are looking for data engineer, we are looking for data science. And of course, they expect these kind of years of experience, and he should be prepared with this. But they say that either he should be very much familiar with Python, Scala, or R. So they give us option. It's not like, you need to come with Python or you need to come with R. No, because the reason for that is, when it comes to cloud and all, right? So you have different languages which are supported for that. So you can choose your own language where you're comfortable. And we don't have any limitations there, so that you don't really have to learn another new language. If you're familiar with Python and you're really good with that, that is more than enough. For a question. SQL DB plus a read replica for analyst for query, for example. I think I'll get to that question, Chris. Yep, I'll get to that question. Okay, let's go back to the portal and see what we've got there. Okay, so this is our portal, our Azure portal. 50. So I think I've already, started playing with those tools. So if you wanted to create your Azure Synapse Analytics, what you need to do is you go to search and do with Synapse, right? And click on this guy. I've already created one, but let's see what fields we need to add while creating this guy. Again, it's pretty straightforward. Select your subscription, select your resource group, right? And then you need to create a workspace. If you remember, we had to create workspace for Databricks, right? And we had to create workspace for HD Insight. I don't really think we had to create for HD Insight, but you had to create a workspace for Databricks. So similarly, yeah, I think you also need to create workspace for Machine Learning Studio, Machine Learning Service. I think Machine Learning Studio is like a classic one, old one. But if you wanted to launch your machine learning service, you also need to create a workspace. So workspace is nothing but, it's like, again, hierarchy, right? So you have your subscription. Within subscription, you have resource group, and within resource group, you can have n number of workspaces. Okay, then you choose in which workspace you want to log in and you want to start your work. For R&D can have another workspace. For HR and marketing can have one workspace. It's like, a consolidated platform where you do work for that specific workspace. Instead, like, if you wanted to segregate that when it comes to your organization. So it's like an unique workspace for you to work on. Okay, so let's try to add some workspace here. Database, Synapse. Do we already have this one? Okay, you don't have it, it's completely new. And then you select your region, and then here, right? So we have an option to choose. Of course, this is a mandatory option, right? You need to select your data lake storage Gen 2. So this data lake storage Gen 2 will have all the meta information when it comes to your Synapse. So because, when you try to create your workspace and when you try to launch your Synapse, so there will be some meta information, like, all the log related information and all the meta information, right? You'll be launching your ADF, right? You'll be launching your Databricks. So there'll be some meta information, log information, which gets generated in the backend. So Azure is saying that I'm not responsible for that, and I'm not going to save all that information somewhere in my disk so that, you don't have to pay. You create your own data lake storage so that if that storage space gets more and more, or if the storage gets more and more, pay for it. So here, Azure is becoming a little bit intelligent, and they wanted us to create our own storage for all that, log and meta information. So here again, this is mandatory, right? So you create your thing. So account name, I've already created a storage account with this name. So you can either create by clicking here, create new, right? So, or else if you already have one, so just select it from the drop down, and then you need to create your file system name. File system name is nothing but like, directory. Okay, so just create a directory within this container or within this account. Within this account, create a file system. Okay, so then I think by default, once you create this, so it will grant you a contributor access. Okay, contributor is nothing but where you have all the specified required information access so that you can do all the operations on that data lake. Okay, so then you add all this required information, then click next, next, next. And here you need to provide your details, SQL administrator credentials. So by default, it will launch you a SQL pool. So there are again two types of SQL pools here. So one is serverless, the other one is dedicated SQL pool. We're going to see what they are, but here you need to add this information. Okay, so just try to give these details. demo USR. Yeah, so just try to give your server login details, and I think the rest everything you can keep as it is. You don't really have to worry about that. I think these are like related to permissions. Like I said, managed identities, we will discuss on that. What are they and how they are, what's their importance when it comes to integrating different Azure services and systems. Okay, then click on next. And networking, allow connections from all IPs, addresses. Yeah, so you can also specify that when it comes to, let's see that, for now, let's keep everything default and then click next, then it get reviews and it does some validation check. Okay, then it should give me the price and the cost. Maybe it's still trying to do. So here, if you see all the required information which we've added, and also like, server details, login details. Okay. Yeah. So the cost is per terabyte. Okay. So for per terabyte, I'll be charged 4.22 euros. Okay, so usually this creation of this service will take time. It takes somewhere between 8 to 15 minutes, depending on the region and everything, because here I've selected East US, right? So based on that and based on the availability and all, it takes some time because this is like a very big service. So I'm not going to click on create. I already have a service. Let's go and view that. But by default, you need to fill all those details when you want to create a Synapse. Okay, so click on Synapse, and then I already have one which I've created. Okay, click on this one, and let's try to see what details we have. So I think all the kind of information which you fill here. So here you see we had to add data lake details, right? So it creates a URL for the data lake. ADLS, Azure Data Lake Gen 2. Okay. And it creates dedicated SQL endpoint, serverless SQL endpoint, development endpoint. So this is the actual Synapse endpoint. Okay. And SQL server details. And the file system, which we have added, right? File system 507, it's like, file system, the directory, the folder structure. And yeah, so then if you scroll down, you have this getting started. You can open this Synapse Studio. We're going to see that. And you also have a document here. And then here under analytics pools, you have SQL pool, you have Spark pools. Okay. So here we haven't created any SQL pools, right? Because while creating this data warehouse, by default, it creates a built-in SQL pool for us. I mean, for that SQL pool, we had to give all these details, username, password, and everything. Okay. So, and by default, when it creates for us while launching the Synapse, it's called serverless. And if you wanted to create another pool, we will see how to create that, but that's going to be dedicated. You can also opt for it. And then you have another thing, which is Spark pools. And Spark pools is nothing but, in-memory computation. You can also launch Spark pools as well. By default, it doesn't create anything because this is costly. And if you have like, very big mission critical IO performant jobs which you need to run within this SQL, then you need to create Spark pools for that. Okay, so then you know these details. I think these are quite common, and monitoring, these are quite common for all the services. We have seen them. And when it comes to security, you have different options. Okay, managed identities, we'll see that. Encryption, we know by default. Yeah, I think by default we have an encryption option there. And okay, this workspace is not configured for that. You need to change that configuration. And here you have firewalls. You can also add your client IP, like, my local system IP, and you can allow and you can, deny the IP addresses for security purposes. Okay. Okay, this is private endpoint. We don't really have to worry much about this guy. And then let's go to SQL auditing. I think most of these features, if you remember when Laksh was explaining about SQL database, most of these features are common for that, because at the end we are talking about a database. But again, database, data warehouse, Synapse, we will get into that. But these features, if you see, almost these features are similar to the one which we've already seen when it comes to SQL databases, right? They have just copied those features and they have just added them here with the Synapse, because they don't want to really put investment and everything there. And then you have Azure Defender for SQL. So I think by default it is off. You can turn it on. So Defender is nothing but, there is an extra service which will defend your SQL database. But we don't really have to worry much about this. Usually the security part, right? Like I said, you will have your dedicated teams to work on that. But for you to just understand here, you don't really get any questions on that. And then, okay, so here in this analytic pools, right? So you click on SQL pools, right? So by default, like I said, once you create Synapse, you have this built-in SQL pool and it's a serverless type. Okay, so you can also launch new SQL pool from here. You can also create new SQL pool from the studio. We're going to see that how you can create, but you also have an option to create it directly from this page itself. So to create a new pool, just you need to add all the required information right here. The metric is based on DW. We've seen SU yesterday, streaming units. So here we are talking about data warehouse units. Okay, DW is nothing but data warehouse units. So based on the data warehouse units, the price is going to be charged for us based on it per hour price. Okay, so here you'll be creating a dedicated SQL pool. So this is going to be dedicated SQL pool. It will be dedicated for your use case or for your workloads. Okay, and there is another thing called workload management. We're going to see that. That's really amazing. For me, I really liked it because you can also create workloads and you can assign them to different users. And based on the priority, if I run a query and you are running a query, and if my priority is high, my query is going to be executed first. And the system literally is going to park your query aside. It doesn't really throw, but it's going to park it and it's going to give preference to my query. So that's a part of workload management. I think we also have that concept when it comes to Azure Synapse. Okay, so here it's going to be dedicated SQL pool. So I'm not going to create that, but you can create it from here. And then you can also create your Apache Spark pools as well. So click new and then you add your details and everything, right? So here again, you can choose number of nodes. So I think this shouldn't be something new for you because we know why we have nodes when it comes to Spark, right? So when it comes to Spark, you have two main things. One is driver node and the other one is worker nodes, right? So Spark execution will be done in nodes. So you don't really have to worry about if I add like 5 or 6 nodes, how it is going to be integrated. For example, 28 nodes, how this 28 nodes are integrated with my Synapse node. Internal architecture is already there in place. So we don't have to really think about that. So that's the beauty of cloud, right? What's happening in the backend, we don't have to worry. So it's taken care by Azure. That's their headache, not our headache. Okay, so you can also add all those details, and you can also choose which kind of system you want, like how many cores, what's the size of GB. Because here, if you see, it's like memory, right? You're trying to select the memory here because it's memory optimized family, and all the Spark jobs will run in memory, right? I'm not going to do that. Okay, so going back to overview. So here, important thing when it comes to exam, right? So important thing what you need to understand when it comes to Synapse, at least from this, right? So you have two types of pools, okay? SQL pools and Spark pools. And we know what are SQL pools. We know, at least we know what are Spark pools, right? So Spark pools, by default, when you create Synapse, you don't get them. You have to explicitly create them. When it comes to SQL, by default, there is a built-in SQL pool, and that is serverless. So when it comes to SQL pools, there are two types. One is serverless, the other one is dedicated. Okay, so whenever you try to create a new dedicated SQL pool, right? So whenever you create something, it's going to be a dedicated pool for you. I think you can also create a pool from here, create Spark pool from here, SQL pool from here, refresh, reset password, and everything you can do it directly from here. Okay, so the key takeaway from this main portal is pools, analytics pools. Okay, all the execution is going to be done on these pools. So that's the reason these two are really important. Okay, so let's move forward. So now we have this Synapse Studio. So you open this one and it's going to be opened in a new tab. So this is like the unified experience which I was talking in the slide. Okay, let me zoom. Sure. Okay, I think 175 should be good. Okay. So I think this window or this portal is kind of similar to ADF, right? Because Vishwa already explained ADF, and we have seen different features when it comes to ADF. I think this one, for me, they might have just copied the ADF portal code and they would have pasted it here with minute changes when it comes to the portal or the UI. because for me it's similar to ADF. Okay, so let's try to explore this portal a bit here. So we are talking about Azure Synapse, and when we discussed with the PPT, we said that it's a unified experience where you have ADF, where you have Databricks, where you have data lake, data warehouse, everything, and Power BI, everything in one place. That's what we discussed, right? Let's try to see if that's true or not. So ingest, right? And explore and analyze and visualize. Okay, if I click on ingest, if you see this is exactly the same thing when we saw the demo from ADF, right? There, Vishwa explained the copy tool demo, right? Where you can copy the data from source to sink, source to destination or target, right? So in the source, you had to add all those different connectors. Let's say, I think the demo was like picking a file from data lake, source file, and doing some transformation. I think it wasn't even doing some transformation. Copy tool was just doing pick a file from data lake from one container and send it to a data lake to another container. So copy tool just picks the file and copies, right? So ingest is nothing but the copy tool, what we have seen in Data Factory. Exactly. So again, we have seen this, right? Different types of triggers in ADF. You can run it now, trigger now, you can schedule it. You can schedule it based on time, right? When you want it, and you can also add recurrences. What is a cycle, like, for every how many minutes or hours you wanted to run this. And we've also seen tumbling window. And I think when it comes to stream analytics, we've seen what is tumbling window. When it comes to triggers in ADF, we've seen what is tumbling window, right? Usually for tumbling window, we don't have days. I think we have only hours and minutes. But when it comes to schedule, we have hours, minutes, days, and weeks, right? So here, tumbling window, we are talking about streaming data. So it's going to be within hours and minutes. I think that's the only difference. And the rest, everything is like, almost same. Okay. So this is nothing but the trigger module, what we have seen in ADF. It's the same thing. Okay. So then you add all the source, you have target, you add some settings, and then review and finish. Then this copy data tool will go pick the file from the source, and it's going to put it in the destination. And if you add recurrence, it's going to run for every X minutes or hours, which we have scheduled here. Okay. So this is about ingest, right? So if you click on this explore and analyze, I think it redirects to the documentation, Microsoft documentation. Then it gives you all the details here. And if you wanted to go deep into Azure Synapse Analytics, you have get started, create, you have create serverless, analyze using serverless, and analyze using dedicated, and how to create dedicated SQL pool, how to analyze data in storage accounts, and integrate with pipelines. Here we are talking about, let me zoom it a bit. Here we are talking about integrating data with pipelines. So what it means is ADF, visualize data, Power BI, monitor, right? So if you wanted to go into these details, so you can just click on this explore and analyze, it will redirect to this document. Okay. So where you have all the information about Azure Synapse Analytics, and you have different things. Like I said, this is really important, because nowadays, everyone wants to take a subscription of this. That's it, because everything is included, right? You don't really have to go one by one and launch the service and integrate and take all the security headache. It's there in one place, like unified experience. That's what they say. And then if you click on this visualize, it will try to connect to your Power BI tool. Okay. If I click on this, then it will give me a new page or asks me to fill this form. You can give the name of this and then try to connect to your tenant and add the workspace, right? And if you already have a Power BI service where you already have some reports, then you can try to connect to that Power BI service, and then you can try to do more exploring, more exploration on that. But for me, I don't really think you'll get any questions on this, but there will be one question, like a standard question. So it'll be like list of options, and there'll be like a question for ingest, what tool you're going to use. It's a data factory. For preparation, what tool you're going to use, it's going to be a Databricks. For storage, it's going to be data lake. For visualization, it's going to be Power BI. So that is the only question which I've seen so far when it comes to data engineering. But I think there is another certification for data analysts, I believe it's a DA100, where you have Excel and Power BI. So that is where you have you need to have deep knowledge when you want to crack that certification. But when it comes to data engineering, you don't really need to have more knowledge on this part, at least on the BI part. Okay. Just try to understand that you can integrate with your existing Power BI service, and you can retrieve all the information and work in Synapse. Okay. So that's about these three options, and then if you scroll down, you have some links to Knowledge Center and Browse Partners. And if you've done anything, that will be listed down here on the recent sources. And yeah, I think that's it. Okay, let's try to explore what we have on this side. So there you have a shortcut option, but before trying to understand these things, let's try to understand these things. So mainly when it comes to Synapse, right? So you need to memorize these things, because you might get questions like in Synapse, you'll get a screenshot of this guy, and within this guy, there'll be like, some fill in the blanks. So for me, that is something which you need to at least, know that what are the different tabs you have within Synapse. So we have home. Within home, you have default page, and you have data, develop, integrate, monitor, and manage. It's not really hard to remember this, but just try to focus. When it comes to data, right? If you click on this, then you have this option. So you have two things when it comes to data. One is workspace, and the other one is linked. Okay, so within this workspace, I think you'll have all the list of databases, because right now we don't have any databases. That's the reason we don't have anything. So if I click on this, you can create SQL database, right? Within the workspace. And when it comes to linked, right, we have created Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, if you remember, right? Because like I mentioned, if you wanted to store all that meta information, like I said, all the logging, all the meta information, Azure asking us to create our storage account so that it can bill us. So that information will be listed down here. So if you click on this, Database Synapse primary data lake, right? And within this, I have created a file system. It's like a folder. So that should be listed. Yeah, file system 507. So usually, if you wanted to upload any data, you can also do that. So you come here, click on this link, and you get all this hierarchy. And then you have an option to upload the data. So if you see, this is kind of similar to what we have in data lake or storage accounts. Upload, create new folder, select, refresh. Not all the options, but few of the options you have where you wanted to upload some data manually. You can just directly do it from here, because they call it as like unified experience, right? So they wanted to also provide this option for us. Okay, so this is about linked. And then if you click on this plus sign, you have an option to create SQL database. And then you can click if you wanted to connect to external data, that option you have under linked. Like I said, when it comes to data, you have to remember two things: workspace, linked. Okay, just try to just make a picture of this and take a snapshot from your brain so that you don't forget this. Data, you have two options: workspace, linked. Okay, and then if you click on plus sign, you have again workspace and linked. Within workspace, you can create SQL database, and within linked, you have few options. You don't really have to remember this. Within linked, what you can do is you can connect to external data. Okay, if I click on this, you get the Azure supported services here. Yeah, so within this external data, you have Azure services, like I said, Blob, Cosmos, right? Azure Data Explorer, Azure Data Lake. So if you wanted to connect to any of these services, so you can click on them, and the process. We've already seen this in ADF, right? So what are the different other options we have? So this we know, and what are these two? So integration data set is nothing but if you wanted to integrate with services which are not Azure, I believe. If I click on this, yeah. So here you have all the options. I think you also have Azure as well. I think same options. I don't really understand why they have given like two tabs. I mean, they would have just given one tab where you have everything, but why they have, I don't know. So here within this integration, you have options to connect to different systems. Again, this is like a copy paste of the code which we have seen in Azure Data Factory. This is nothing new. We've already seen this. So this is about linked data. And there is another option which is browse gallery, right? So this is like, if you click on this, let me show this. So you have a data set which was submitted by the community, okay, by volunteers like us. So if you wanted to work on any of the data set, right, you already have that data here in the gallery. So you can pick any of this data, and if you wanted to just practice maybe your analytics or something like that, you can pick any of this and then you can select. You have a gallery for data sets, you have gallery for notebooks, right? So, and again, different notebooks with different languages. These notebooks are done or written on PySpark. And this was in Scala. If you're coming from Scala background, and this is on Spark.NET C#, right? And again, Spark SQL. This is on SQL if you're coming from SQL background. So you have different notebooks. Okay, so here I'm talking about notebooks, not SQL scripts. Don't get confused. Data sets are different, notebooks are different. Okay, and then you also have SQL scripts in the gallery again from the community. So you have like sample SQL scripts. So if I wanted to just open this guy and just have a quick look on this one. So usually it looks something like this. All this SQL scripts, like select blah blah blah, all the SQL data. Sorry, SQL query, and you have a description about that, what it is about, and all, right? Different tags. Yeah. Close this one. And what else we had in the gallery? If I go to this one, yeah, you also have pipelines. So here we are talking about Azure Data Factory pipelines. Okay, so they have also created some pipelines, and I think you can also save pipelines as a template, right? So if you wanted to have, you don't want it to start a project from scratch and you just wanted to leverage a pipeline which is already there, then you can see the pipeline which is connected to different systems. You see here these icons, they represent different systems, and this is a pipeline which is connected from databases, I think Oracle to Azure Synapse. So you can also see the description here. And all these pipelines are from Microsoft. I think these are all from Microsoft. Yeah. So you can also use some existing pipelines. I think you can use them. You don't really have any issues or licensing problem. Leverage them. Maybe if you wanted to copy data from HDFS to Azure Data Lake, use this and make some modifications and put them in the production. You don't really have to work everything from scratch, right? So this is all about gallery. Let me go back. So this is about data. Okay, this is about data tab. Let's see what we've got in develop. Okay, so in develop, you don't have anything here. So if you click on plus sign, okay, you have a couple of options here. So in the develop tab, what you can do is you can build your SQL scripts, right? You're coming from SQL background. Okay, you have SQL scripts to build. Click on this. Yeah. So here you can write your SQL query and run it. Yeah, here you can write your SQL query and then you can run it. Of course, you need to just publish that and you need to run. I think you've already seen how to publish and all in Data Factory session, right? So here, let's say I already have like 4 SQL pools. One is serverless. I've created 3 dedicated SQL pools. So when I try to write my code and run, under or against which pool it is going to run, that is what you select from here, right? So again, this is the same option which you have seen when it comes to Databricks. There we had to create clusters, and once you write your scripts in the notebook, you can map or you can attach your notebook to the cluster, right? Similarly, once you write your SQL script, you have to connect to the pool. If you have like different pools, you'll have the list here. Select the pool and then run and execute it. So that SQL script will be executed against that pool. When I say against that pool, all the resources, computation, memory, IO, everything will be utilized from that SQL pool. Okay. So this is about SQL scripts. You can build them here, right? You can also get a query plan. Then you have another option. If you're coming from Python or Scala or like, scripting background, then use this notebook. So you can build your scripts here. So this notebook is similar to Jupyter. This notebook is similar to Databricks notebook. So this is kind of similar, right? So you execute your code. You can do it like one by one, like, import or like, create a data frame and then do transformations on the top of the data frame and then save it, right? So again, here you run notebooks against Spark pools. Okay, but we don't have any Spark, so we cannot really attach. So here SQL scripts will be ran against SQL pool, and notebooks and all the Python code and Scala code will be ran against Spark. Okay, so this is something important to keep in mind. So like I said, unified experience, right? You can run SQL, you can run notebooks. Okay, we can do these both things. I think we can do these both in Databricks as well. So what else Synapse is bringing on the table? Let's try to explore more. This is the second option we've got here. The other one is data flow. Okay, we know what is data flow, right? So you can create these data flows in Data Factory. I think data flow is like code-free transformations, I believe. If I click on data flow, yeah, This is the exact same window which we've seen in Azure Data Factory. Click on source, you try to drag and drop on different attributes. I think we've already seen this, the demo, right? So, but you can execute SQL scripts, notebooks in Databricks, but you cannot run data flow in Databricks. I think this is something you do in Azure Data Factory. But here, you can do both of them in one place. So I think this is something extra it is bringing to the table, okay? So data flows you can do. Let's say you are coming from ETL background, right? Then you use this data flow to do your analytics or do your code transformations or data transformations, sorry. So what else we've got here? Again, Apache Spark job definition. I think you define your Spark job because, I think we've also seen this, you create your notebooks, then you submit as a job for Databricks, right? So that kind of definition you create here in the Apache Spark. So then you connect to the system and then you write all your options here, right? And then you submit this job. And I think you can also execute this for Python, Spark, and .NET, right? Let's say you're coming from Spark and big data background, then you can leverage this one. Browse gallery. Again, we have an option to browse the gallery. Again, it redirects and points to notebooks, SQL scripts, and pipelines, which we've already seen in the previous session. So here in the data, in the develop part, you can develop things. Okay. In the data, you can connect to different connectors, linked services, or SQL databases, right? That is what you can do in the data part. When it comes to develop, you can build all the scripts, notebooks, data flows, jobs, and everything. You can do that. And if you already have something on your on-premise or on your local machine, like a template, you can use this import option, and then you can just directly upload that. If it is like a notebook, if it's like a SQL script, or if it's like Azure Data Factory data flow template, you can just reuse that by just using that import option. So that is what we have here in the develop. And then if you click on integrate, let me try to close all these options, close and discard, close and discard, close and discard, close and discard. Yeah, so here on integrate, right? So integrate is nothing but the exact ADF module. It's complete ADF module. It's complete ADF module you have here on Synapse. Okay, so if I click on this, you see you have pipeline, you have copy data tool, you have browse. So here on the develop, you have seen data flow. Data flow is a part of ADF, but it's not complete ADF, right? It's a part of code free transformations, which you can use drag and drop interface to create your pipeline. So that comes under develop, and that is part of ADF, and that is added in the develop section. But when it comes to integrate, it is the exact module of your ADF. So you can create pipeline, copy data tool. We've seen this, and you can also browse the galleries. Let's say you wanted to create a pipeline, then you have the exact list of activities, right? I think Synapse is something which is extra here, but the remaining everything is the same, which we have seen there. Come here, I think. So here, move and transform, data explorer, Azure functions, right? Databricks, which we have seen in ADF, general, HD Insight, iteration, machine learning. You see all the components which we have in ADF, we have them here as well. Like I said, this is the exact replica of ADF. So you can just drag and drop them. You can use debugging tool, you validate them. You can also add triggers, right? If you add a trigger now, or you can create a trigger, like, event-based trigger, schedule-based trigger, you can do that. So this entire integrate module is ADF, right? So, and again, you have a copy data tool. If I click on this copy data tool, you have same options here for you to add your source and target, right? So there is so much of overlapping here, right? That's the reason we've put Azure Synapse at the end, so that because if you really understood, if you're really focused or understood ADF, this part, you don't really have to go through it again. The only thing is you need to understand that you have ADF here. But what I'm trying to say is you don't really have to do all the labs and experiments again and again. And if you understood Databricks, how to execute notebooks and all, you don't really have to go into this develop part and try to execute those notebooks, because you've already done that in Databricks. Okay, so that's kind of similar to that. And then you have another option called monitor. right? So within monitor, I think this monitor is same as ADF, but there are like few additional things. When it comes to integration, you can see the list of pipeline runs. If you ran any pipelines, you get that list here, right? And what kind of trigger duration, I think we've seen this in ADF. And trigger runs, all the trigger list, you can see it here. And schedule triggers or tumbling triggers or event triggers, and integration runtimes. We know what is integration runtime, right? So you have Azure, self-hosted, and SSIS. I think by default it creates auto resolve for us, and you can also create your integration runtime like self-hosted or Azure, and you can see that list here. Okay, and this is about integration part. So when it comes to analytics pools, you have two types: SQL pools. You can see them here. I think by default we have built-in or serverless, and that is online. And if you have any Spark pools, you can see them here, right? And then if you submit any SQL requests, those will be listed down here. Okay. So what is the duration and how much? What is this guy? Data is processed, all that kind of information, and every SQL request will have a unique request ID. That information you see here. And Apache Spark applications. If you have submitted any Apache Spark job in the develop section, that kind of information you can see it here in this list. Okay, Spark session or batch job, right? Then data flow debug. So there is an option where you can enable the debug in ADF, and that if you have enabled that, you can also see that debugging information here, all that kind of log and debug. You can do that here when it comes to data flow. We're talking about data flow, code-free transformation. Okay, don't get confused. So like I said, it is a very narrow and very slight, I mean, if you don't really understand it properly, then it's kind of confusing. Oh, we are talking about SQL pools, we're talking about Spark pools. I mean, what is this Spark? We've already seen Spark in Databricks. We've seen Spark in HD Insight. Why do we have Spark in so many places, right? So that's the reason we started building up slowly the story with all the different components in last 8 to 9 days session. And finally, we wanted to show you everything can be done in one place. That's called Azure Synapse. Okay, and this is about monitor. Then the last option we've got is manage. So what we have in manage. So manage, you can create SQL pools. So where else we can create SQL pools? Okay, you can create SQL pools here, and you can also create SQL pool here, right? And you can create Spark pool here. You can also create Spark pools here. Why do they have to give us so many options to create? Because they want us to create so that bills will get generated at the end of the month and they can make money out of it. But yeah, you've got options to create in different places. You can create it from here, you can create it from here for Spark and SQL, and you can also do it from here. Okay, and this is a place where you do it, where manage. So this is mainly used to do all the management, creation, deletion, all that kind of thing. And linked services, right? So this is a place where you do linked service creation. I think we've seen this linked services in ADF, so I don't really want to go deep into that. And then triggers, you can create triggers here. You can create triggers when it comes to integration. We have also seen there as well. You can create new trigger, you can edit the existing trigger, or you can create new trigger from here as well. Okay, and integration runtimes, we have seen this. I think you can also create integration runtime directly from here. So don't get confused between monitor and manage. In monitor, you can view the integration runtimes, the status of it. But in manage, you can create new services or new integration runtimes. Okay, so that's the difference between manage and monitor. Again, when it comes to security, you can provide access level securities, and then you have an option to integrate this with the Git repository, right? So yeah, I think these are the options we've got when it comes to manage. Okay, so data set, develop with all the options you have got, integrate, use ADF to create your pipelines and trigger them, and then monitor, you monitor everything in one place, and then you manage. I mean, if you wanted to create everything, like, when I say create, if you wanted to create SQL pool, Spark jobs, those kind of things, you can do them. Okay. So in a very high level, this is about Synapse. I think we've got like 2 or 1, I'm not sure. We've got a lab to do on this. We will see that. But before that, you have so many options here. Now, let's talk about practical implementation, right? Let's talk about business. I only want to use Data Factory. I don't want all these other options because, like I said, when you were creating the Synapse, right, per terabyte, it was showing us the charge, right? One is storage thing, the other one is data movement or data transformation or data processing thing. So it will be charged for both. Okay. So I only want to use ADF. I only wanted to use the integrate option. I don't want this entire thing. Then you don't use Synapse at all. You don't use it. You use only data factory. I only want to use notebook options, but I don't want to use this entire thing. Then you don't use this. You go for Databricks or you use HD Insight, but you don't have to use this. But I want to use warehouse in the cloud, but I don't want to use Synapse. Oh, this is tricky. You want to use warehouse, but you don't want to use Synapse. Synapse is the advanced version of warehouse. But don't worry. I think they also have the SQL data warehouse thing. I mean, you don't really have to create Synapse to use the warehouse, right? So if I go to SQL data warehouse, boy. Yeah. So if you see here, dedicated SQL pools, okay, formerly called as SQL DW, short form for data warehouse. So before they used to call as SQL data warehouse, and now they renamed it as dedicated SQL pool. If you see this, right? So dedicated SQL pools, I think we've already saw this in Synapse, right? So in Synapse, you can create dedicated SQL pools. So this is what I was talking about. Synapse is a combination of everything. You can create dedicated SQL pools. You can create Spark pools. You can create ADF. You can create notebooks, right? You can create integration runtimes, everything. But I only wanted SQL pools because SQL pools are nothing but data warehouses, right? So don't get confused when I say SQL data warehouse, it's nothing but dedicated SQL pools. I only wanted cloud data warehouse. Then you choose this option. You choose this guy, dedicated SQL pool. So you click on this. I've already created one. So to create this, again, it's very straightforward, right? So select your subscription and then select your resource group and then give a name for your SQL pool. Okay, give a name for your SQL pool. So for example, I give like SQL pool AB, for instance. Okay, I already have. Then you also need to provide the server because SQL pool, for me, it's nothing but a database, right? So database has to be in one server. So here, SQL pool, you give the name and then you provide the server details. So you also need to create a server. Like I said, it's a database and database has to be hosted in a server, right? So you create a new server. For me, I already have a server, so I'm just mapping it to that, or else you can create this. And here you need to select the performance. Like I said, when it comes to data warehouse, you have data warehouse units. When it comes to data factory, you have data integration units. When it comes to stream analytics, you have SU, streaming units. Okay, so those are like different kinds of metrics we have when it comes to performance. So the performance of this data warehouse depends on the number of DW units you're going to select here. And also the billing for you is going to be charged based on the number of units you're going to select here. Okay, so select your performance levels. So if I select 100, I think by default, the starting price, because this is really expensive. So let's see if it gives me the starting. Yeah. So you see, starting at 1.27 euros per hour for 100. If I select 400, 5.09 euros per hour. It is really expensive. So this will be charged based on hours. It's like hourly basis. So here you have two charges. One is storage charge. The other one is processing charge, right? So once you create your SQL pool, you need to start it or you need to pause it. So if you're not using it, you can pause it. I mean, you can stop it so that you still be charged for the storage, but you won't be charged for the data transformation or for any queries which you're running there. Okay. If you don't pause it, hourly 5.09 euros will be deducted from your credits. Okay. Just be careful on this when it comes to data warehouse. Again, this is an expensive thing. So here what we are trying to do, we discussed about Synapse. Synapse is done. We are just trying to set up an individual data warehouse because for me, the requirement is not Synapse. For me, the requirement is only cloud data warehouse. Okay, you select your DW units, then click on apply and then cancel and then go to networking and then I think the rest everything is same. Here again, if you've noticed that when it comes to SQL database, you have an option to use existing data or you can you can upload your own backup, like, own backup data from your on-premise, so that before creating the data warehouse, it will be added with all your backup data. Or else by default, you also have a sample database, AdventureWorks, right? From the Microsoft, you can also do that. So this is similar to the database we are talking here, right? But this is the data warehouse service. Everything is like set up for us. So you can choose anything you want, then go next. And I think you can add tags and then review and create. That's it. Then you have your SQL data warehouse. So I think I've already have created one, SQL Pool A, right? So if I come here, then this is a server name, and the rest everything is same. The performance I've chosen was DW100. Okay. So here, if you see, if you don't pause this, you'll be charged on hourly basis. So you need to pause this. You can also scale your units. You can restore. You can create a new restore point. This is for backing up and for recovery part. Okay. And new Synapse workspace. We will see what is this. Okay, so if you see, it's already charging for me. I think I forgot to pause that, and not really sure how many credits it already utilized from my account. But yeah, so please make sure that you pause this. Okay, if you click on this, I think it will give you that there are no active user queries. Would you like to continue and pause SQL? Yes. But for me, I just click on no. Okay, so then you have workload management. This is what I was talking about. We'll discuss this in tomorrow's session. And then maintenance and a very high level. These are the options you've got. And if you see here, all the options related to SQL database or SQL server, you have them. Data masking, right? For instance, you might have seen that, especially when it comes to credit card details, right? So you have all the information, or maybe you have only last 4 digits and all the remaining digits will be like, marked as XXXX. So that's nothing but data masking, so that you are masking data with some X character, so that no one can view that data. And then data discovery and classification, we'll see that you also have auditing option, firewalls and networks. You can add your IP address. I think all these options are same. And again, data encryption, right? So we will see what is this data encryption, right? Data encryption at rest, data encryption at transit. You have different options there. And you have query editor. We have seen this. If you click on query editor, where you can execute all your queries, and you can also open your Visual Studio. Nothing fancy. I mean, we've seen all these options. You also have monitoring options. Okay. So I have created this database, right? Let me go to this overview, and this is a server and all this information. So what you can do is you can just connect your SQL Server database to your client. Your client can be anything. Okay. So here my client is, okay, okay, so here, like I said, you can connect to any of your clients. For me, I'm trying to connect with my SSMS. It's like, query editor for Microsoft database, right? So let's try to connect to this one. So to do that, just, click on this, then you have an option. Then you need to provide your server name, your authentication. Like if you want to do it with Windows or Active Directory or SQL Server authentication, just provide the same details. So here the server name, you pick the server of this guy, right? And then authentication can be user login and password. So while creating this, it will ask you to add your SQL Server details, login details. I think I've shown you that, right? So let me go back to this one. While creating this guy here, so here SQL Server, right? So here it will ask, right? You need to add SQL pool, and that SQL pool should be part of a SQL Server, right? One server, and that server details, you will give server details and username and password. So these username and password, we need them to connect from your client application. Okay. So here, if I try to do that with my password, right? Connect. If you don't enable, or if you don't add your client IP, it will give you an error. So make sure that go to firewalls and virtual settings and add your client IP address there. So then you can see the SQL Pool server databases. So within this database, I have created SQL Pool A, and I have enabled a sample data. Okay, that's the reason now we are able to see some data. So within tables, you can see some data. Come on. Yeah, here you see adventure works data. Okay, you can see all this data. So here you see dimensions. Here you see fact. So we'll discuss more on this. What is dimension? What is fact in tomorrow's session? What is star schema? What is snowflake schema? What is workload management? Right? What is SCD type 1, type 2, type 3? And we're going to do some demos on Synapse. I think we've got like 1 or 2 demos on that. We will do that, and then you get like more and more understanding about this. But when it comes to cloud SQL data warehouse, you don't really have to do much, right? I mean, this is cloud data warehouse. That's it. See, you've created your cloud data warehouse. This is what you've created, and you connect to your systems and create your dimensions and facts, and then ready to use. Yeah. So you've got some options here. These options we'll discuss on Synapse, because those options are same for Synapse and for this, so we don't really have to do it twice. Because we are discussing these options for Synapse, it means you need to understand that these options are also applicable for data warehouse, because Synapse is the combination of data warehouse, data factory, Databricks, and everything. Okay, don't get confused there. So let me get my PPT, what we have here. So this is about data warehouse and this is about Synapse. I think now you should get some understanding. At least you should know what is Synapse now. If someone says what is Azure data, Azure Synapse Analytics, at least you should be able to, you know, discuss with them or just try to debate with them saying, oh, this is Synapse, this is not. At least you get some understanding, right? This is what we have seen, everything in one place, right? It's like, you know, data warehouse, data ingestion, big data, end-to-end analytics, right? With limitless scale. This is what we've seen. This is what we've seen. So here we've seen, like, you know, we have SQL pools, we have Spark pools. That's the reason you have these 2 runtimes, because all the SQL requests will be taken care by SQL. All the notebook or Spark or Python requests will be taken care by Spark. Okay, the underlying storage will be data lake, right? That's where we create using the linked connectors, right? And Synapse Studio, we've seen what is Synapse Studio. Within Synapse Studio, you have all this. We've seen integration, we've seen manage, we've seen monitor. We also see seen security, right? You also have Power BI integrated with that. Yeah, so when it comes to pricing, right? So comparatively, like, you know, when you compare to GCP, when you compare to Snowflake, Snowflake is again, like, you know, cloud data warehouse, dedicated cloud data warehouse system. I think even that is also, like, you know, high in demand in the market because they are specialized in cloud data warehouse. And when it comes to AWS, you have Redshift. So when it comes to comparison for the price, they say it is 94% less when you compare with Google, the Synapse. That's what they are saying. Yes. And it is also faster, 14x faster comparatively to other services. Then you have all these options which you have seen. Okay, I think I've got something in the chat. So I hear about BigQuery, Snowflake, Redshift far more than Synapse. Is it because Synapse is catching up? Just yes, correct. It is because Synapse is catching up now, because Microsoft is slowly, because for me, Microsoft doesn't do much advertisement, or it does less marketing, right? And it is catching up now because, you know, they have launched these services recently and they're adding more and more advanced functionalities to it. So that is the reason you don't hear much about Synapse, because this is new to the market and not everyone has adapted it. But if you try to explain them all the features and functionalities we have within Synapse, you can't really compare this with anyone out there in the market, at least for now. This is definitely a unique platform. Definitely a unique platform, if you ask me. Yes. Then modern versus Synapse, right? So modern, like I said, you need to add and, you know, launch all the services. But when it comes to Synapse, everything is there. You just need to start. Just need to start implementing. You have notebooks, you have visualization, you have applications, connect and start, period. Yeah. Like I said, you know, before we had a big list here. Now it's only Azure Synapse. And the storage is data lake. But here it is only Azure Synapse, right? Now you get better understanding what is Azure Synapse, what we are talking here. So this is a demo which you've seen. This is like provision Azure Synapse service. I think we have created Azure dedicated SQL pool. That's what we have created. Create SQL server. We have done that. We have created Azure SQL pool, but we haven't connected to Synapse. We have connected to a SQL data warehouse, right? Don't get confused with this. And you can pause and resume compute node. This is what we've done. Create a firewall rule, connect to Microsoft SQL Server like SSMS. We used that and we've connected to that. Okay, so this is the UI portal. I think before you had explore and analyze, but now explore and analyze together, you have one option, but this will point to the documentation. Yeah, so this is actually what I wanted to explain. So Synapse provides a unified experience for all data professionals. So regardless, right, if you're a data engineer, if you're a data scientist, administrator, or business analyst, or IT professional, or BI professional, it doesn't matter from which background you're coming from. So Synapse has a place for you. Synapse has a tool for you. Synapse has proper methodology and a service for you to work with. Okay, so this is actually what I wanted to show. So this is all about Synapse. So in tomorrow's session, we will try to understand data warehousing concepts, right? Like I mentioned, different methods we have in the data warehouse. Again, why do we need to understand them? Because these are really important when it comes to exam. Because here, when you try to launch something, you don't really need to know them. But when it comes to exam and when it comes to real-time implementation, these concepts are really important. So in tomorrow's session, we will be talking about all the important exam topics when it comes to Synapse. I mean, you see these questions directly, straight in the exam. So tomorrow we're going to discuss on them, and also like a delta lake. I think that's one topic which we missed. I think we'll discuss tomorrow, and by end of tomorrow we should be done with our codes. Take care. Connect tomorrow. Bye.